Chapter 31. Traffic was light as Rash headed uptown. He wasn't sure just where he was going, but there was more of the island uptown than down, so he turned north. Behind them, they could hear the alien spaceship making a third pass at Carr's building, but Rash figured by now they were just making the rubble dance. There wasn't anything still standing. He pulled onto FDR Drive at Houston Street, looking to make a better time, and for a few moments the breeze through the van's windows cut the stifling heat. The air was heavy with humidity. Rash felt as if he could almost touch the moisture, and off to the west, between the towers of the city, he could see dark clouds on the horizon and distant flickers of heat lightning. The damp air seemed cooler, and the clouds had the look of an approaching storm. He thought the heat wave might finally be about to break. The lightning reminded him of distant artillery though, and he remembered the spaceships. He couldn't use the mask while he was driving, but they could be up there, anywhere, watching, scanning for the thing on Schaefer's neck, and the van was exposed up here on the elevated highway. An easy target. And besides, where the hell was he going that he needed to make time? He got off onto 23rd Street and headed west, then turned north again on 3rd Avenue. The police radio Rash had installed in the van was chattering. Carr's building was gravel by the time anyone got there. Gravel that was still churning. McComb came on and said that it was settling, but McComb wasn't there. The officers at the scene said it looked like something was shoving debris around, searching for something. They stayed the hell away. Settling or searchers, it didn't look safe. Rash thought that was a good idea. The movement would be the invisible aliens, on the ground now, recovering the body of their fallen comrade. Anyone who got in their way would be hamburger. At Schaefer's direction, Rash got off the avenue and found a place to park on a cross street somewhere in the 30s. "Carr," he said, "how many men can you get us? You lost Edgy and Hatchek." "I lost more than that," Carr interrupted. "Those bastards have been taking my people down one by one for weeks. Most of my boys who aren't dead yet are lying low." Schaefer stared at him. "You said you could help us," he said accusingly. "That's right," Carr said. "I was figuring something big was going to come down. Whoever was picking my people off wasn't going to keep it up forever, just getting them one or two at a time." Rash glanced at him, but he didn't say anything. Sooner or later, whoever it was had to come out in the open, and I figured on being ready for him. "And?" Schaefer asked. "And I lined up some muscle. Not my people, loners and freelancers." He grinned. "Just what we need to use those toys of yours." Schaefer nodded. "So what do you figure you'll need to get us the men we need? A week?" Carr laughed. "You're not listening, Schaefer. I said I wanted to be ready. Couple of hours should do it." Schaefer looked at him silently for a moment. "No shit," he said at last. "No shit," Carr agreed. "Gotta make some calls, but we can get this over with. Tonight." "Go ahead," Schaefer said, pointing at a payphone. "Make your calls." It was busted, of course, but they found a working one 2 blocks up. "Yo," Carr said, holding the receiver. "Give me some change. I left my wallet at home." He grinned again. "Rash?" Schaefer asked. He was freshly back from his little vacation in Central America and hadn't had time to worry about things like money. "How many calls you making?" Rash asked, digging for quarters. "A lot," Carr answered. "Just give him your card, Rash," Schaefer said impatiently. Rash frowned, then dug out his MCI card and handed it over. Carr took it, still grinning, and began punching numbers. "Why don't you boys go somewhere else for a few minutes?" he said. "I've got stuff to say that maybe you might not want to hear." "You don't," Rash began. "Come on, Rash," Schaefer said. "We'll get a bite to eat." He jerked his head towards the hole-in-the-wall diner down the block. Reluctantly, Rash followed. "God damn it, Schaefer," he said as they stepped through the door. "He's going to run up God knows how much of a bill, and I'll never get reimbursed. You know what an asshole McComb is about unauthorized expenses. That son of a bitch could be calling his mother in Hong Kong for all I know." "Yeah," Schaefer said. But more likely he's calling every cheap hood, dope dealer and gangbanger on the Lower East Side. And next month, you'll have an itemized bill right there in your mailbox with every one of their private numbers on it. Ever think of that? He smiled thinly. Car's just as stupid as he is cheap. Rash shut up, reluctant to admit that no, he hadn't thought of that. They sat at the counter and ordered sandwiches and coffee, and while they ate, they brought each other up to date on what had happened while Schaefer was out of town. Rash was mildly pleased to hear that Echeverria was dead. Schaefer was less pleased, but very interested, to learn what Rash had seen through the mask. He'd seen one ship for himself half an hour earlier, but hadn't really had time to think about it. They were just finishing when Carr came in and announced, "Let's go." "Where?" Rash asked. "You just drive," Carr said. "I'll tell you." They got the van rolling, and Rash followed Carr's directions, arriving a few minutes later at the entrance ramp to the lower levels of a parking garage a few blocks farther up 3rd. Somehow, Rash found it appropriate to be meeting Carr's friends below street level. "Stop here," Carr said, as Rash pulled onto the ramp. Rash stopped. "What?" he said. "We need the password or something." "No," Carr said. "You two wait here. I'll drive down alone. Then we'll see. My people are expecting a blow-off, yeah, but against cops, not a bunch of little green men. Some of them aren't always easy to convince. You gotta give me some time to sell this." "You gotta be kidding," Rash protested. "We're carrying enough ordnance in here to start a small war. I'm not gonna let you pass it out to your scumbag pals like party favors." Carr grinned, and Rash wished he had the strength, and the nerve, to knock those teeth out. "Let him go," Schaefer said, as he picked up the mask and his appropriated M16 and opened his door. "Do it his way, for now, and if there are any problems, we'll kill him first." He got out of the van. "Wow, ultimatums," Carr said. "My little heart's palpitating in fear. Maybe, when this is over, Schaefer, we can get together and see who's really king of the hill." Schaefer grinned back at him, and Rash reluctantly climbed out of the van. Carr slid into the driver's seat and started the van down the ramp. Rash and Schaefer watched him go. "I'd like that, Carr," Schaefer said quietly. "I'd like that a lot." Rash sat down on the narrow curb at one side of the tunnel. He glanced down after the van, but he could see nothing. The entrance ramp curved. He sighed. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was midnight. Carr's calls had taken well over an hour. So here he was, in the middle of the night, sitting in a parking garage hoping to make a deal with an insane gang boss to join forces in a hopeless battle against monsters from outer space. How the hell had it come to this? These things from the spaceships were like something out of one of those paranoid sci-fi movies from the 1950s, killing just for the sake of killing. No, he corrected himself. They weren't. Those monsters had had reasons. They wanted to conquer the world, or they killed people for food. They didn't kill just for fun. These things did. In the more recent movies, the aliens were usually the good guys, come to save humanity from itself or just paying a friendly visit. These things obviously weren't doing that either. It didn't seem right somehow. "It's funny," he said. Schaefer was still standing in the roadway, staring down the ramp after Carr. He didn't respond. "It's funny," Rash repeated. "Those things are way past us, technologically. Their ships make the space shuttle look like a matchbox toy. They've got ray guns and invisibility and God knows what else. And yet they still get off on hunting and killing things. They take trophies. They seem to love blood and pain. I wonder why. I mean, shouldn't they be more advanced than us socially as well as technologically? Wouldn't they have outgrown all that?" Schaefer glanced at him, then went back to staring down the tunnel. "You think that's something you outgrow, Rash?" he asked a moment later. "Isn't it?" "Maybe." Schaefer paused for a moment, then said, "Maybe they're just like us. Technology removes us from our true selves. Lets us pretend we don't have to kill to eat. Lets us forget we're all a bunch of killer apes. It takes us away from the beast inside. People talk about getting back to nature, and they just mean going out in the woods somewhere and treating it like a fucking garden. A bunch of birds and bunnies and flowers. And they forget that Mother Nature's a bitch, that claws and fangs and blood are natural, and gardens aren't. Nature's a jungle, not a garden. Well, Rash began. Schaefer cut him off. Maybe those things up there don't forget what nature's like. Maybe the hunt is their way of getting back to nature. Their way of keeping the beast alive. Keeping that competitive edge that lets them develop their spaceships and ray guns. Maybe they need an edge. Maybe they're worried about natural selection selecting them out if they get soft. Maybe the whole goddamn galaxy's a fucking war zone, a big bloody free-for-all, the law of the jungle on a cosmic scale, and those bastards need to stay tough to survive. He shrugged. Or maybe, he added after a second's pause, they're just naturally sadistic sons of bitches. Rash stared up at his partner. That was about the longest speech he'd ever heard from Schaefer. You really think we can beat them? He asked. Schaefer didn't answer. They sat and thought and waited, but Rash didn't ask what Schaefer was thinking or offer to share any more of his own thoughts. He thought about Shari and the kids and hoped they were safe, up there in Elmira or back home in Queens, wherever they were. He hoped they weren't too worried about him. He thought about those files Brownlow had shown him, about the string of hideous murders that might have been committed by the aliens, or might just have been an unusually vicious serial killer. Carr thought that it was the aliens. Rash hoped it was the aliens. It bothered him that he couldn't be sure it was the aliens. What kind of a species did he belong to, that he couldn't be sure people wouldn't do that to each other? And what kind of species did the aliens belong to, that they apparently not only committed such atrocities against other intelligent species, but saw nothing wrong with it? Those ships weren't just a couple of desperate criminals or crazed degenerates running loose. Those ships were an organized party of some kind. A big one. And that meant that whatever they were doing, it was just fine with their folks back home. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe, when those monsters got home, they'd find themselves facing the alien equivalent of a picket line, placards reading, "Save the humans," angry demonstrators throwing blood or paint at the hunters, the way demonstrators attacked women in fur coats. People didn't have fur, but those things sometimes skinned their victims. What did they do with the skins? Did they wear them? Was Lamb's face going to wind up on another planet, stained with extraterrestrial paint? Rash was tired and hungry, and this chain of thought was making him feel slightly sick to his stomach. He was in great shape to save the world from the Martians, he was. Or even just to tackle Carr and his buddies, if they decided not to help after all. And besides everything else, his ass was sore from sitting on the hard concrete. He shifted uncomfortably and scraped a shoe across the pavement. Schaefer raised a hand for silence. Rash listened. Footsteps were approaching, coming up the ramp. Rash turned and watched as Carr came into view, an assault rifle slung on his shoulder, a machine pistol on his belt. At least a dozen other young men were beside and behind him, all of them armed to the teeth with the contents of Rash's van, with the weapons Salvati had given him, everything the Somalis had sold to the Jamaicans, all of it loaded and ready to go. Ammunition belts were draped across tattooed chests, automatic weapons were tucked under muscular arms, shotguns were clutched in sweaty hands. "Hey, Schaefer!" Carr called. "We put it to a vote, and it was unanimous. Humans 1, alien shit 0. Schaefer smiled, a humorless baring of teeth that Rash didn't like at all. "Good," he said. "So listen up while I tell you what you're up against." A couple of Carr's buddies glanced at one another. Someone said derisively, "Oh, tell us, Mr. Policeman." "The things we're fighting are invisible, except through one of these." He held up the alien mask. "They all wear them. I figure they're invisible to each other without them, same as they are to us." "You got those for all of us?" a black kid with a shaved head and an AK-47 called. Nope, just the one. But you take one of them down, you want to get its mask. How are we going to take him down if we can't see him? You'll see a weird shimmer in the air when they're near, Schaefer explained. Aim for it with all you've got, and don't wait. These things are bigger and stronger and faster than you are, and I don't care how big and strong and fast you think you are, they're more. Faster and stronger and we can't see them, someone mumbled. Shit. That's why you've got the guns, Carr said. If they're invisible, how do we know they aren't watching us right now? We don't. Not for sure, Schaefer said. Except if they were, they probably have already started killing us. Hell, another man said, hefting a tripod-mounted belt-fed machine gun. I didn't come here to hear no fairy stories about invisible bogeymen. Why don't we flash this pig and test fire our new toys over in the Diamond District? He turned and looked around at the others for support. Schaefer stared at the man for a second, then lashed out without warning, a single blow of the fist. The man went down and lay gasping on the asphalt. Any more questions? Schaefer demanded as he picked up the mask again. Yeah, Rash said. How are you planning to find them? How are we going to lure them in where we can get at them? Showgirls and dancing bears? A big sign. Today only. Everything half price to killer aliens. I had an idea about that, Schaefer said. A couple of ideas, actually. First off, you said you saw them cruising over the city, right? Right, Rash said, not sure where Schaefer was going with this. So they aren't hiding. They don't realize we can actually see them through this thing. They've got no reason to hide. They're probably still up there cruising around. All we have to do is watch. Second thing, they're still tracking me. He touched the device on his neck. I figure they're probably cruising over this place every few minutes, keeping an eye on me. So they're cruising overhead, Carr said. You didn't bring us goddamn F-16s, Schaefer. How the hell do we get them down here? Or did you want us to all help you watch the pretty ships go by? I think the arrogant bastards are getting cocky, Schaefer said. Sure, we took out 2 of them so far, but they've trashed a lot more of us, and most of the time, we've been running from them, not fighting. I figure if we get their attention, they'll come down here after us. That'd be the sporting way to get us. Shooting us from their ships would be like hunting deer with a bazooka. It'd work, but it wouldn't be any fun. Yeah, but just how do you figure to get their attention? Carr asked. Schaefer pointed to the Soviet anti-tank gun that Rash had used to kill the one at Carr's place. With that, he said. I don't know if it'll punch through whatever armor they've got on their ships, but 10 to 1, they'll notice it.